In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King says comprehensive reform is a strategic choice and a shared and collective national responsibility. Royal Air Force jets strike and destroy several vehicles trying to cross the border from Syria. And 25 Palestinians are injured by Israeli police in clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King said comprehensive reform is a strategic choice and a shared and collective responsibility. He stressed that the Jordanian citizen is the focus of the reform drive. King Abdullah told the President and members of the 17-member National Action Front parliamentary bloc of the need to pass priority reform and economic legislation. The meeting with the bloc, headed by MP Abdelhadi Al-Majali, is the latest in a series of regular encounters he has held with MPs and parliamentary blocs. His Majesty said an effective role by blocs in the lower house requires a constant evaluation and upgrading of the legislature's role to help in drawing up national plans in cooperation with executive bodies. In this context, the King emphasized the principles of partnership, integration, and cooperation among all authorities to address the various challenges and back up the reform endeavor. He said the economy is the paramount challenge and top national order, urging all concerned authorities to join forces and ease pressures on citizens. In addition to domestic affairs, the meeting also dealt with regional and international issues, including the Middle East peace process and the Syrian conflict. The King said Jordan is in close contact with all parties to the Palestinian-Israeli peace process and has been kept up to date on the negotiations in a way to safeguard the kingdom's higher interests. The bloc members praised the King for reaching out to MPs and being open to their proposal as an embodiment of the democratic course. Prime Minister Abdul Mansur said the government and House are partners in the national building process. He said he would take seriously all remarks by parliamentary blocs in the policy-making process. The cabinet discussed the crime of the abduction of Jordanian ambassador to Libya Fawaz Aitan by armed men in Tripoli yesterday. The ministers were updated on latest security and diplomatic contacts by various agencies and stressed collective efforts by all bodies to secure the release of the envoy. In a meeting chaired by Prime Minister Abdul Mansur, the Council of Ministers said the diplomat's safety is a top priority for the government and its agencies. The cabinet pledged to do its utmost to secure the freedom of the ambassador. The kidnapping of Ambassador Aitan while on his way to work was strongly condemned by the UN Security Council. In a statement, the Council expressed deep concern over the attack and demanded the immediate release of the envoy. It called for referring those behind the abduction to face justice and urged the Libyan authorities to protect diplomats. Royal Air Force jets struck and destroyed several vehicles trying to cross the Jordanian border from Syria. A source at the Armed Forces General Command Headquarters said the incident took place at 10:30 a.m. when a number of camouflaged vehicles were seen trying to illegally cross rugged frontier terrain and ignored warnings not to proceed. It said that after repeated warnings that the armed forces would not allow a violation of the border, a number of Royal Force jets fired warning shots towards the vehicle, but they did not heed the warning and continued. The military source said the vehicle's failure to stop had prompted the army to apply engagement rules and destroy the vehicles. Prime Minister Abdul Mansur attended a ceremony for the signing of a cooperation agreement between the Jordanian and Bahraini Civil Service Bureau. The agreement entails cooperation in public sector jobs, mainly with regard to the exchange of expertise and benefiting from the electronic data system in both countries. During a meeting with the president of the Bahraini Civil Service Bureau and the accompanying delegation, Mansur said Jordan was ready to provide Bahrain with Jordanian expertise in various fields. The Prime Minister added that Jordan is proud of the achievements it has made in the human resource field. Mansour said Jordan has the highest education rate in the Arab world and also pointed to the kingdom's advanced medical sector. He said the government was determined to grant the Jordanian Institute of Public Administration a wider role to train and qualify employees. Jordan urged the UN Security Council and the world community to assume their responsibility and help stop Israeli attacks against Al-Aqsa Mosque and Muslim worshippers in occupied East Jerusalem. State Minister for Media Affairs Mohammed al-Momani called for an end to violation and provocations by Jewish extremists, which could destabilize the region. Momani commented after at least 24 Palestinians were injured in clashes with Israeli police at Jerusalem's mosque compound. This report has more on the confrontations.
Israeli police staged a show of force at the Haram al-Sharif mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. Paramilitary police stormed Al-Aqsa mosque grounds to disperse stone-throwing Palestinians protesting as Jewish zealots who repeatedly entered the flashpoint site to pray in a provocation against Muslim worshippers. The confrontation erupted after police tried to escort some 20 Jewish extremists into the plaza, revered by Muslims as the noble sanctuary, Islam's third holiest shrine. Palestinian youths who had gathered inside Al-Aqsa Mosque ran outside and threw rocks at the group of ultra-Orthodox Jews celebrating the Passover festival. Israeli police in riot gear pushed onto the compound and used stun grenades to disperse the demonstrators. Tensions at the site run high, especially during Jewish holidays, when Palestinians fear ultra-nationalist Jews will breach the sanctity of the mosque. The Palestinian Mufti of Jerusalem said the violent confrontations at the holy site were completely unacceptable.
What happened today is outrageous, scandalous, and a serious assault on Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is unacceptable by all standards and human rights charters in this holy Islamic shrine. What is going on is aggression against Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Outside the complex, police fired tear gas at Palestinians who scuffled with them. 25 people were treated for gas inhalation, and a medic said a woman was taken to hospital after being hit by a rubber bullet. Police routinely escort Jewish settlers into the compound, which also houses the Dome of the Rock. Palestinian concerns have been heightened by the fact that allies of right-wing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu often lead the provocative visits to the mosque compound. A police spokesman said police forces left the plaza but closed it temporarily to Palestinian worshippers. He said no arrests were made at the scene. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
Amid the tension in occupied East Jerusalem, a meeting between Palestinian and Israeli peace negotiators scheduled for today was postponed by one day. Israeli cabinet members have asked for the postponement after the killing of an off-duty Israeli police officer in a shooting attack in the occupied West Bank. At a meeting in his West Bank office with a group of Israeli lawmakers, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas condemned violence and the killing of both Palestinians and Israelis. The Palestinian leader has held several meetings in the past with Israeli legislators, mainly members of the opposition in parliament. A spokesman for Abbas said the negotiating session had been rescheduled for tomorrow at the request of the United States. Washington is struggling to extend the talks, which were on the verge of collapse beyond an April 29 deadline for a peace deal. Flag-waving crowds rallied in the Syrian capital Damascus in a show of loyalty to the Syrian government. The rally came ahead of Independence Day celebrations. Hundreds of people waved Syrian flags, portraits of President Bashar al-Assad, and messages of support for the government and the army. Syria's civil war has torn the country apart, killing over 150,000 people, a third of them civilians. Millions have also been displaced over the three-year conflict. A massive rescue operation was underway off South Korea, where a ferry capsized with hundreds of people on board. More than 280 people, many of them students from the same high school, were missing in what could be the country's biggest maritime disaster in over 20 years. The ferry was carrying 462 people, of whom 174 have been rescued. 4 people were already confirmed dead. This report has more.
A fun field trip for students to Jeju Island turned sour after the ferry capsized off the southwestern coast of South Korea. Many clung to the ferry's sinking hull as rescue teams pulled them to safety. Here, an inflatable boat is thrown from a helicopter, then a diver rappels down and swims out to help passengers. Around 160 people have been rescued from the ferry, which was travelling from Incheon. They're the lucky ones. In temporary shelters and medical centres, survivors tell their stories.
I held a handrail and moved toward the right side of the ferry to ride a helicopter as water kept coming in. Trash cans were floating and water came up to my neck.
But more than 300 people are still unaccounted for, and some deaths have already been confirmed. Many here said they heard a loud bang, and within hours the ferry was nearly completely submerged.
Once the ferry listed, water came in very quickly. I couldn't see it. I felt in my bones that I had to escape when I saw water was flooding an aisle next to a cabin.
Many passengers who were uninjured were taken to this high school gymnasium, where distraught parents gather for news. As many frantically searched for their children, there were moments of happiness, as some were reunited with their loved ones.
Voters in Algeria head to ballot centers tomorrow, with President Abdelaziz Bouteflika widely expected to retain the presidency. A year after he suffered a stroke, Bouteflika appears to face little challenge for a fourth term after 15 years in power. He has rarely spoken in public since the illness that put him in a Paris hospital for 3 months. Born on March 2, 1937, Bouteflika was a veteran of Algeria's war for independence from France. Loyalists of the incumbent believe he pulled Algeria from the darker days of its 1990s bloody war with Islamist militants. Bouteflika's opponents say the president is too weak to run the country. Several parties have boycotted a system they say is tilted in Bouteflika's favor. But with no serious challenger and the backing of the National Liberation Front, allied party unions and the army factions are on his side, and Bouteflika is expected to get all the votes. His allies say he is well enough to govern. The European Commission handed documents to European Union member states explaining the potential impact on their economies of imposing stricter trade and financial sanctions on Russia over its action in Ukraine. In Ukraine, separatists defied an operation by the Kiev government to recapture eastern towns controlled by Moscow supporters. We get the details in this report.
Pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine's eastern town of Slavyansk remain in control of the local administration building, police and state security service headquarters. This morning, 6 armored troop carriers entered Slavyansk carrying the Russian national flag and the banner of pro-Russian separatists. The attempt by the Kiev government to reassert control slowly without bloodshed came on the eve of four-power talk in Geneva tomorrow. The Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers will meet for the first time in the presence of the United States and the European Union. Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk angrily reacted to the latest developments, telling his cabinet that Russia was exporting terrorism to his country. Also, the head of the counterintelligence department of the Ukrainian Security Service said they intercepted conversations of the Russian military from Slavyansk and had arrested agents recruited by Russian security services. He said the Russian military had been tasked with killing between 100 and 200 people as a pretext for sending in troops. U.S. Republican Senator John McCain called for more military support for Ukraine as he visited Lithuania.
We should be providing them with military assistance. So far, the Obama administration has refused to do so. That's very unfortunate because it only encourages Vladimir Putin.
NATO said it had decided on a series of immediate steps to reinforce its forces in Eastern Europe. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said allied military staff will be sent out to improve NATO's preparedness, training and exercises.
We call on Russia to be part of the solution, to stop destabilizing Ukraine, pull back its troops from the borders and make clear it doesn't support the violent actions of well-armed militias of pro-Russian separatists.
Relations between NATO and Russia have turned icy since Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea region last month. NATO, accusing Russia of massing forces on Ukraine's border, has also suspended cooperation with Moscow. Farah Ajluni for the news at 10.
The search for the Malaysia Airlines jetliner deep in the Indian Ocean was again cut short. Technical problems forced a U.S. Navy underwater drone to surface without finding anything. While a massive air and sea search for the missing MH370 is continuing, hopes have been pinned on the Bluefin 21 autonomous underwater vehicle finding the first concrete sign of the plane in more than 6 weeks of hunting. Exceeding its depth limit, U.S. naval personnel said the drone could take up to 2 months to scour a 600 square kilometer area where the plane is believed to have sunk. But Malaysia insists it would continue even as some Middle East countries have stepped forward to offer their help on the mission.
We will not scale down. This is a promise that I made to the families of the passengers, and we will continue. But as we move forward, and there might be occasions where some of the countries might want to scale down, there are other countries that have come forward. And we just have to find creative ways to do that.
Old rivals Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal both comfortably dispatched second-round opponents in the Monte Carlo Masters. Former world number 1 Federer barely broke a sweat as he breezed into the third round with a 6-1, 6-2 thrashing of Czech Radek Stepanek. The Swiss will next face another Czech, Lukas Rosol. Clay court machine Nadal, however, recovered from a stuttering start to beat Russian qualifier Teimuraz Gabashvili 6-4, 6-1 to reach the third round. 8 times French Open champion Nadal next faces Andrea Seppi of Italy. The Los Angeles Clippers racked up a franchise record 57th win of the season with a 117-105 thrashing of the Denver Nuggets. Blake Griffin scored 24 points while picking up his 16th technical as the Clippers led from start to finish. Chris Paul added 21 points and 10 assists, and DeAndre Jordan pulled down 16 rebounds along with his 13 points. The win kept the Clippers within 1 game of the Oklahoma City Thunder's second seed in the Western Conference, with 1 game remaining in the season. And finally, cool tonight in the hilly areas, but mild in most regions with northwesterly light winds. Tomorrow it will be warm across the kingdom, but hot in the Jordan Valley. Winds will be southwesterly, changing to northwesterly, stirring dust in the Badia regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect hot conditions tomorrow, with northerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King says comprehensive reform is a strategic choice and a shared and collective national responsibility. Royal Air Force jets strike and destroy several vehicles trying to cross the border from Syria. And 25 Palestinians are injured by Israeli police in clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.